Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Bolzachelli for Catholic Studies Academy. Today I'd like to speak a little bit about the pericope of the woman caught in adultery, which we find in the Gospel of John, in the beginning of chapter 8. Some will be surprised to learn that this passage was not found in the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament, but it appears only later, although it does appear to be of ancient origin, and it was known to many of the fathers of the early church. It's referenced both by St. Jerome and St. Augustine, who admittedly are writing in the 4th century. But it was already in the lectionaries in the Western Church, so we know that it actually goes back quite a long way. It was regarded as canonical by the fathers of the Church, so it seems, though it's not quoted universally, probably because it wasn't in the manuscript traditions. But what I want to discuss today, actually, is the point that the passage is trying to make. Many Jews find the passage offensive because it suggests that these Jewish actors should be taken to represent Judaism as a whole, which should then be seen as a ruthless, merciless kind of religion in which people point their fingers outward at others and ignore their own faults. But as a matter of fact, we're really talking only about a small faction within Judaism of zealots, okay? And these zealots did, in fact, disobey the law, right? They would chase people down in the street, as in the story, and they would prosecute them under their own authority as they see themselves as ministers of a righteousness to which the Jewish people are covenantally held, and they know, and others don't or don't care. Saul of Tarsus, prior to his conversion and his renaming as Paul, seems to have been among this faction within Judaism. And it's to this faction that this story is addressing its criticism, not Judaism as a whole. And I think it's important, in fairness, to make note of that fact. So in fact, the actions being taken would have been in contravention of the law, both Roman law and of Jewish law, because even before Judaism ceased to practice any form of capital punishment on the basis of its concordat with Rome, capital punishment had fallen into practical disuse within Judaism. And when it was used, it was used rather sparingly and only as a last resort. So not in the fashion that we see it in this particular passage. So that being said, what should we take away from this passage? The woman is chased down by these zealots and she's cornered. Jesus is put into the position of taking sides between Roman law and covenantal law. No matter what his answer would be, they predict he's going to condemn himself. He'll either come out as an opponent of Rome, or he'll come out as an opponent of the covenant itself. He can't win. So what he does, actually, is rather clever, right? He says, well, the covenantal law applies, but let's begin with those of you who are without any sin of your own, and thus should not be condemned by the very same law. At this, those who chase the woman down drop their stones. They turn one by one and walk away. None of them is without sin. And yet, none of them can imagine any alternative but to subject someone to the death penalty, a penalty which they themselves do not wish to face. Rather than sit down beside the woman and hear what Jesus has next to teach, they walk away and they don't hear what it is that Jesus has to say. Jesus actually has another answer to this problem. Rather than condemning someone to death, he has the capacity to liberate people from their unrighteousness, to purify them once again, that the death penalty would no longer apply to them. Here, Jesus asks the woman, after the others have left, who remains who condemns you? And she says, no one, sir. Then neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now, he doesn't just let her off the hook. He orients her anew to a life of righteousness, which presumably, through the inpouring of grace, through the Holy Spirit, she finds herself able to live. She's going to live a life of righteousness, we think, from this point forward. She's liberated from enslavement to sin and from a condition which doesn't warrant the gift of life into a life of righteousness. But it's this transformation that those who had turned and walked away are not here to receive for themselves. They remain in their sins. They remain as they were, and they're deaf to the news that Jesus sought to bring. They can't imagine a world in which mercy can overwrite sin, in which righteousness can replace unrighteousness, can supersede it and give us a new form of life, one which we had abandoned through our own fault before. They don't hear this news, and that's the great tragedy of the story. But you and I can hear it, and when we hear it, it presents to us both a caution for how we regard the sins of others, and also hope for how we regard our own.